Let's talk about expungement. What are the reasons why you might want to get a case expunged? Well, Indiana has got a website that allows for anyone to look up criminal history from a person that they know. Maybe it's a potential dating partner, maybe it's a babysitter, maybe it's somebody that you plan to do business with or a neighbor. If you've ever been arrested and or convicted of a crime in the state of Indiana, more likely than not, that information is going to be online. That is the number one reason why someone might call and ask, what can I do to get my record expunged? Obviously, there are a lot of other situations that may go hand in hand where an expungement could be helpful. Maybe you've got an opportunity for a promotion at work. Maybe you're trying to go further with your education. Maybe you might be looking for military service. It might be simply a situation where you would like to exercise your constitutional right to carry a firearm. All of these are the kind of reasons why an expungement might be a good situation for you to further explore. You don't need an attorney to expunge a case or expunge a conviction. However, there are very specific rules and guidelines that have to be followed for an expungement to be effective. The last thing that you'd want to do is to try to do one on your own and then find out that you've done it incorrectly, you don't get the relief that you're looking for, and in the worst case scenario, you may not be able to fix it. Number one thing that you would need to do to start that exploration of what expungement relief is available for you is to figure out exactly what your criminal history is and what it shows. I always recommend that you go online and run a limited criminal history search for yourself with the Indiana State Police. From there, your driving record also is helpful. It will have information on there. And of course, if you've got your own documentation of cases that you may have been involved in over the years, any files or paperwork that you've kept with that can also be helpful. There are specific waiting periods for the different kinds of cases that might be expunged in Indiana. For any case that was dismissed, where charges were not filed, maybe you successfully completed a deferral or a diversion, you must wait at least 1 year from the date the case was filed before you'd be eligible for expungement. For misdemeanor convictions or lower level felony offenses that were later converted to a misdemeanor, the waiting period is 5 years from that date of conviction. For the lower level felony cases, what used to be Class D now would be level 6 felonies, the waiting period is 8 years. As you get into more serious crimes, the waiting period can vary based upon how long your sentence might be after your date of conviction, whether you're serving a prison sentence, probation, parole, things of that nature, or it may be an 8-year period from that date of conviction, whichever date comes later. That's another reason why it would be helpful in those types of cases, those more serious felony offenses, to discuss your rights with an attorney. So you figured out what your criminal history is. You've waited the appropriate amount of time. What are the next steps? I always tell people that the petition for expungement in Indiana is like a cake recipe. It's very specific. There are exact things that have to be listed in a proper order in order for a court to grant your expungement. But for those most common cases, those where your case was dismissed, a misdemeanor, or that lower level felony conviction, as long as you meet the requirements, your expungement will be granted. The language in the statute says the court shall grant the expungement, not the court may, in their discretion, grant it. So you've got those items, you've figured out what you need. The next thing is to make sure that there's no outstanding fees, fines, or costs that are still owed as a part of the case you're attempting to expunge. I receive many calls from people where they're well past the time, they've never gotten any more trouble, but there was an outstanding court cost, or perhaps there was restitution or probation fees, and they didn't realize that. By law, the court cannot grant your expungement while those fees are outstanding. Once you show a zero balance and you have got all the documentation put together, then you could talk to an attorney and begin the process of putting your petition for expungement together. An expungement petition is what they call a verified petition, which means that you are going to be signing it as well as the attorney that prepares it, verifying under penalty of perjury that all the information in there is accurate and true. That's helpful because with a verified petition, oftentimes you can avoid going to court for your expungement petition. Prosecutor would have an opportunity to look at it, file any basis for objection if it exists. Most of the time it will not. And after 30 to 45 days from the time that your petition was filed, usually your expungement is granted. At that point in time, that information will disappear from mycase.in.gov. It should not show up on civil background checks, and almost always, absent very unique and specific circumstances, you can answer in the affirmative that you've never been arrested and or convicted of a crime. Sometimes you may get tripped up by language on job applications or legal documents that you could receive where it will ask about your criminal history. And you might think, well, I got an expungement granted, but how do I answer this? It's also almost always a question for a lawyer, but the language has to be very specific under the Indiana Code. They can only ask questions like, other than cases which you've had expunged, have you ever been arrested or have you ever been convicted? So again, you always want to make sure that you're answering those questions truthfully. But again, if you've had an expungement granted, a truthful answer would be no. The verified petition, again, is very specific in what it must include. Full name, aliases, date of birth, social security number, driver's license number, any address that you've had since the commission of the offenses listed in those expungement petitions. All that's helpful and important information that you should have put together and ready to go before you contact an attorney to discuss your expungement options. You may only file expungement petitions once in your lifetime for cases that resulted in a conviction. Dismissed cases are a little bit different. There might be situations where you can file more than one of those, but a petition for an expungement of a conviction case can only be filed once. Now, you may have cases in multiple counties that would require separate expungement petitions. You can file more than one of those, but they all must be filed within one calendar year. So say you've got a theft from Marion County and an OVWI from Hancock County, and you've got a reckless driving from Hamilton County. That's going to require 3 separate expungement petitions because you can only file in each specific county. You would be able to file that Marion County theft, and then a 1-year clock starts running for any other petition that you must file at that point in time. If you miss that deadline, absent good cause shown, you would never be able to file for an expungement again. Obviously, with that in mind, if you have an expungement petition granted by the court and your criminal history is expunged, and then at some point later you're arrested and convicted on another offense, you would never be able to expunge that second conviction. So it's always important to make sure that once you get the relief that you work so hard for, that you protect it and take care of it so that your criminal history doesn't come back. Expungement in Indiana is not a true erasure or deletion of a criminal history. It will always be there. An arrest or a conviction can be viewed for legitimate law enforcement purposes. If an officer stops you on the highway, he's likely going to see that expunged case that you might have had from 15 years ago and will be aware of that when he comes into contact with you. If you are up for certain types of employment that might have security clearances based upon governmental agency regulations, they're likely going to be able to see that. If you are applying for a career in law enforcement, they will be able to see even expunged criminal history. Your federal NCIC or FBI criminal history will likely still show expunged criminal history. There's no way around that, and unfortunately it is just a reality of the way that the law in Indiana currently stands. Expungement law in Indiana is constantly changing. There are updates, additions, corrections, deletions each year whenever the legislative body takes action. And it's important to make sure that you stay aware of those changes and how they might impact you in your criminal history.